All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful tools in all of business strategy. I'm talking about Porter's 5 forces. Now, this isn't just some dusty old theory. It's basically a secret decoder ring for understanding the hidden rules of competition. The stuff that really decides who wins and who loses in any industry.
So, have you ever wondered about this? Why are some industries just a total bloodbath, a constant battleground, while in others, the same few giants seem to call the shots for decades? It's a great question. I mean, think about it. The fast food industry is a complete free-for-all, right? But the soft drink market? It feels like it's been locked down forever. The answer to this puzzle is all about understanding these invisible forces of competition. So let's get into it. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll lay out the rules of the game. Then we'll break down each of the 5 forces one by one. New players, the power of suppliers and buyers, and all those competitive threats. And then, the fun part, we'll put it all into practice with a deep dive on the smartphone industry. And finally, we'll talk about why this whole framework is so important. Let's go. All right, Section 1, the rules of competition. Look, to really get what's happening in any industry, you can't just look at the obvious rivals duking it out. No, you need a map of all the pressures that are squeezing profits from every direction. And that's exactly what this framework is.
So this whole idea comes from a guy named Michael Porter, a legend at Harvard back in 1979. And what he came up with is basically an X-ray for business. It lets you see the hidden skeleton of an industry. The big idea here is that competition isn't just about your direct rivals. Porter said you have to look at 5 different forces because it's all of them working together that really determines where the power is and ultimately how much money there is to be made.
Okay, force number 1, the threat of new entrants. Let's think of this as the bouncer at the door of the industry nightclub. This force is all about how hard it is for new companies to get past the velvet rope and into the party. Because, if anyone can just waltz in, the whole place gets crowded, and it's a lot harder for anyone to make a buck. And the key concept here is something called barriers to entry. Just picture a castle. These barriers are like a giant moat filled with crocodiles surrounding the industry. If that moat is super wide and deep, the companies inside are pretty safe and sound. But if it's just a little ditch, well, they're constantly looking over their shoulder for new challengers trying to storm the walls. The higher those barriers, the lower the threat.
So what do these barriers actually look like in the real world? Well, they come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's just cold, hard cash. You need a mountain of it to even get started. Other times, it's about economies of scale, where the big guys can produce stuff so cheaply that a newcomer can't possibly compete on price. Then you've got government red tape and regulations acting as a wall. And sometimes the strongest barrier of all is just plain old brand loyalty.
Let's take airlines, for example. I mean, you and I can't just decide tomorrow, hey, let's start a new international airline. The cost is just insane. You're talking hundreds of millions, even billions, for the planes, the licenses, getting a spot at the airport. It's a massive, massive barrier to entry. And that's why you don't see new major airlines popping up all the time. And then you have an example like Coca-Cola. This is a perfect case where the barrier isn't really about money. It's about what's in our heads. A new soda company isn't just fighting against another sugary drink. No way. They're fighting against 100 years of Christmas commercials, family picnics, and a brand that's basically woven into the fabric of our culture. How do you even begin to compete with that? It's an almost impossible wall of brand loyalty to climb.
All right, next up, we've got 2 forces that are kind of like a vice grip on an industry's profits. They squeeze from both ends. We're talking about the bargaining power of your suppliers, the folks you buy stuff from, and the bargaining power of your buyers or your customers. So imagine your business is stuck in the middle of a tug of war. On one side, you have your suppliers. If they have all the power, they can just decide to jack up their prices. And what are you going to do? Your profits get smaller. On the other side, you've got your customers. If they have the power, they can demand lower prices or better quality for the same money. And again, your profits get squeezed. The sweet spot, of course, is being in an industry where both your suppliers and your buyers don't have a lot of leverage over you.
A classic example of powerful suppliers? Look no further than the Wintel era of personal computers. Back in the day, if you were building a PC, you pretty much had to buy your processor from Intel and your operating system from Microsoft. There were no other real options. This gave them incredible power over companies like Dell or HP. They could basically name their price and the PC makers had to pay it. All the value, all the profit was getting sucked up by the suppliers. Now, let's flip that coin. For an example of high buyer power, just think about Walmart. They are the definition of a powerful buyer. They purchase products in such mind-boggling quantities that they can pretty much dictate the terms to their suppliers. They'll say, "We want to buy 1 million of your widgets, but you have to sell them to us at this price." For a supplier, it's a double-edged sword. Landing a Walmart contract is huge, but you better believe your profit margins are going to be paper thin because Walmart calls all the shots. Okay, let's get to our final two forces. These are all about the competitive pressures. One comes from the outside, we're talking substitutes, and the other comes from right inside the industry, the good old-fashioned rivalry between competitors. Now, this one is super important to get right. A substitute is not the same thing as a competitor. A competitor is Coke versus Pepsi. A substitute is a completely different way to solve the same problem. Think about it. If you need to get from New York to Boston, you could fly or you could take a train. The train is a substitute for the flight. The more good substitutes there are for a product, the less power an industry has to raise its prices. And we're seeing this play out right now with plant-based milk. I mean, 10 years ago, who was drinking oat milk? But now, if you just want something creamy for your coffee, you've got options. Almond, soy, oat, they all do the job. This huge rise in substitutes is a massive threat to the traditional dairy industry. It puts a cap on their prices and carves out a huge chunk of their market. And finally, we get to the one we all think about first, rivalry. This is the head-to-head, down-and-dirty fight for customers between the companies already in the industry. And when this rivalry is intense, it gets expensive. You see price wars, endless ad battles, a constant race to one-up each other with new features, and all of that stuff just eats away at everybody's profits. The poster child for intense rivalry has got to be the fast food business. Just turn on your TV. It's a never-ending war. You've got McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, all battling it out with dollar menus, wacky new sandwiches that last for a week, and nonstop commercials. It's great for us, right? We get cheap food. But for them, it's a brutal grind that makes it incredibly tough to make a healthy profit. Okay, enough theory. Now it's time to get our hands dirty. We're going to take this powerful 5 forces framework and apply it to one of the most fascinating and cutthroat industries on the planet, the smartphone industry. Let's see what happens when we put it under the microscope. So, let's run through the 5 forces, one by one, for the smartphone market. First up, what's the threat of new companies entering the market? The verdict? Pretty low, actually. It is insanely difficult to just launch a new smartphone brand from scratch and expect to compete with giants like Apple and Samsung. The barriers to entry are just, well, they're massive. And here's why. First, the cash. You need billions with a B just for R&D and marketing to even get noticed. Then you have to deal with brand loyalty, which is off the charts. I mean, how do you convince someone to leave the Apple ecosystem with its blue bubbles and easy syncing? It's incredibly sticky. And on top of all that, there's a legal minefield of patents. The big guys own everything, and they will sue you into oblivion. Okay, what about the power of suppliers? Here, the tables turn. It's actually moderate to high. Even a behemoth like Apple can't just do whatever it wants because they depend on a very small group of highly specialized companies for the guts of their phones. Just think about the most important parts. For the high-end processor chips, you've pretty much got Qualcomm, and that's about it. For the operating system, it's a 2-horse race, Google's Android and Apple's iOS. Because these suppliers have such specialized tech that's hard to replicate, they have a ton of leverage. They can charge a premium, and the phone makers have to pay it. But now let's talk about the power of buyers, and that means you and me. And in the smartphone market, our power is high. The customer is absolutely king, and that puts all the pressure right back onto the phone companies. Why do we have so much power? Well, for one, switching costs are pretty low, especially if you're moving between 2 Android phones. We can go online and compare prices and specs in seconds. And let's be honest, a lot of phones in the same price range are getting pretty similar. All of this forces companies into this crazy, endless cycle of one-upping each other just to get our attention. Okay, what about the threat of substitutes? Can something else come along and replace the smartphone? The threat here is, I'd say, moderate. For now, there's nothing that can truly replace that little supercomputer in your pocket. And its biggest defense is just how versatile it is. Sure, a tablet or a laptop is better for some things, a smartwatch is great for tracking your run, but none of them can do everything a smartphone does. It's your camera, your navigator, your music player, your wallet. It's the Swiss Army knife of technology. Now, maybe someday a souped-up smartwatch could be a real threat, but we're not quite there yet. And that brings us to the final force, rivalry among the existing competitors. And in the smartphone world, the rivalry isn't just high, it is absolutely brutally intense. We're talking about a global, high-stakes war for every single customer. The market is just packed. You've got the global titans like Apple and Samsung, plus a ton of super strong players like Xiaomi and others. This creates a constant arms race. Who has the best camera? Who has the fastest chip? Whose screen can fold in half? It's a zero-sum game. Every iPhone that gets sold is a sale that Samsung didn't make. This is why we see a new phone launch every 5 minutes and why they spent billions on advertising.
So, after running the smartphone industry through that entire framework, let's just take a step back. We've seen the theory, we've seen it in action, so what's the big takeaway here? Why does this whole thing even matter? And this is really the key. This framework is not a crystal ball. It can't predict which company will be the next big thing. What it is a map. It's an MRI of the industry. By understanding who holds the power, where the threats are coming from, a business can figure out where to play. It can find a strategic position to defend itself, maybe even change the forces in its favor, and build a strategy that can actually last. So next time you're looking at an industry, any industry you're interested in, try running it through this framework. Ask yourself, who really holds the cards here? Is it the suppliers, the customers? Is the real danger a new startup, a different technology, or just the competitor across the street? You now have the toolkit to figure that out for yourself. Thanks for joining this explainer.